I think the big thing is we need to change how we view privacy. Together we can share in the positives and the outputs of that. Then we change how we see privacy.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Valerie Lyons, COO of BH Consulting.
Thanks very much for having me, Todd.
It's a pleasure to be here today with you. And before we get started with your piece that you wrote for CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, can you tell us how you got into the privacy security field?
Well, I started, I suppose, as CISO in KBC Bank for many, many years. And then I decided to do a PhD. And I had to find a subject to do my PhD in. And at the time, I just wanted to do a PhD. I didn't know what I wanted to do it in. So I spoke to a professor and he said, look to the future, look to the past. And your PhD is a funnel in between. So that's essentially how I started in privacy was I decided to do a PhD in privacy. Around the same time, which was 2016, the GDPR obviously became a huge thing in Europe. And so I became very involved in GDPR. So the two coincided at the same time. So that's really how I kind of started in privacy. And then obviously my PhD has taken me to various different aspects of privacy, not just the legal aspects.
So I think what seems to be really unique about your career, I mean, I say unique, that a lot of people haven't gone down that path of having a leadership role in security for a long time, and then moving into privacy and seeing both sides of that fence.
Yeah, I actually do think it is quite unique because I can talk two sets of languages. There is a language that the cybersecurity person talks, and it's not the same language as the privacy person. And I suppose something like 27001 would be a good example of that. That's a cybersecurity standard, but now it's brought out a privacy standard for the first time that's written in the same language as the security standard. So I kind of see myself as the human version of the 27001, 27701 standard. I can talk both languages, yeah.
Sure, that's very powerful. So let's get on to your piece. You wrote an excellent piece for CISO Compass called "Doing Privacy Right versus Doing Privacy Rights," and I love the title. And can you walk us through what that's about? And you also talked about this thing called the creepy line. What's that about?
Okay, so the first piece, which is doing privacy rights versus doing privacy right, is actually the title of my PhD thesis. So everything that I research, everything that I write about is essentially about that. The fact that I suppose working for a bank for 30 years or almost 30 years, I have had the experience, and it's my observation that most organizations in regulated industries, they aim for compliance. That's what they aim for. And so I believe that compliance should be the baseline and we should be aiming higher. But it is, what does that higher look like? So that's what right is compared to rights. The second question, which is the creepy line, I don't own that phrase, I'm afraid. That was Eric Schultz's. So he keeps that. But he, about 10 years ago, noted that Google operate right up at the creepy line. And at the time, they really did operate at the creepy line. It's an uncomfortable space for the consumer. The creepy line is a place that leaves the consumer feeling like their privacy is being invaded, but only when they find out about it. And it allows the organization to really maximize profit from data. And there's personalization has value to the consumer as well. But I use the example in my book of where I experienced the creepy line, where you realize that your privacy has been invaded, but you have been given something in the return for that privacy. I think that the creepy line element is something that Google have moved away from. They're trying to position themselves differently over the last couple of years. I don't believe that they play in that creepy line at the moment. And for instance, Facebook would definitely cross the creepy line frequently. But we have other organizations as well now operating up at the creepy line. Most of them would be social media companies. And they may breach the creepy line. We'll just never know about it until a breach happens, that we become aware of the fact that they breached the creepy line. The perfect example is Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. Until we know about these things, we'll never know that those creepy lines have been breached.
So those social media companies are very visible to us as far as what they're doing, and they make the news. Do you think a lot of companies are moving right up to that creepy line, or do you think that they're crossing that line?
I think there's a trend at the moment to maximize profit from data. I think that is definitely the trend. And you will find a lot of marketing departments in large organizations, especially large technology organizations. Those marketing departments will use the term personalization. It's great for our consumers. It's all about how we benefit the consumer. But really what personalization and targeted ads are about is about sales and profit maximization. It all comes back to profit. Whereas I would advocate, instead of looking in the market, to look at the non-market and to look at what they do from a CSO perspective, look at how they lobby, look at how they brand themselves in the non-market area. I would look at that, because that's where we see the trust relationship with the consumer. If you can use privacy to enhance the trust relationship with the consumer, you'll actually get them to give you more information. And that's a different way to go about doing the same thing.
Very interesting. And you talked in your piece about how people look at trust based on their past experiences and other factors and backgrounds. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, they look at privacy. It's how they make an evaluation about privacy. Most people's, we can't just say that privacy is a construct all by itself. We have to look at privacy. In fact, we don't even have a way to measure privacy. It isn't something measurable. We use proxies to measure privacy. Typically, we use proxies like, what's your privacy concern? What's your perceived risk? That's what we use to measure privacy, but we don't actually measure privacy. And so there are many different aspects that build into privacy. They would be your age, your gender, culture, experience, your religion, your whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, so your political leanings. They all affect your sort of perception of privacy risk and your privacy concerns. And so understanding your customer and understanding, do they feel privacy concern? That's part of the trust relationship. So if you can tap into how your customer feels, you can try to fix that using the trust relationship. And there's lots of different ways to fix the trust relationship. We know that, say, privacy notices on websites will help to fix that trust relationship. But we also know in the non-market environment, messages in CSO reports, they also help to fix the trust relationship. If you read a CSO report and you see that an organization is doing wonderful things for privacy advocates groups, then you say, okay, they're actually, I'm going to trust them in terms of how they behave from a privacy perspective. A really good example would be Apple. Apple do a huge amount in CSO for privacy. And they also, if you think about Tim Cook and much of the media information that you see, so again, it's in the non-market environment, much of the media profiling that he has, and a lot of it's marketing as well, much of it will be about why Apple love privacy. It's a value. So they're selling the value. So when you buy an Apple, you buy privacy. That's how you feel. So that's part of the trust relationship.
Yeah, they have definitely capitalized on that. And I think you also mentioned Lego is also very good about protecting privacy for children.
And Lego is good at protecting privacy for children because it's identified that as being something that builds a trust relationship with parents. But they also, in fact, look at lots of other aspects of protecting children. So they're really involved heavily in protecting children. And so one of the things that they look at is privacy. But they've really tapped into what does a parent because it's the parent who's going to buy the toy. What does the parent want? So if we're going to buy the product, the organization needs to tap into what makes us trust them. And invariably, what doesn't make us trust them is the creepy line. But that's where a lot of organizations have gone in the past because that's where maximum profit can be had. But that's the one that makes us not trust them. So they're actually cutting their nose off to spite their face. Essentially, it hasn't been a sustainable strategy. It won't be a long-term strategy. They may make money in the short term, but it won't work in the long term.
Do you think that these laws like GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act are making a difference in helping consumers and companies get closer to increased privacy?
Well, I suppose CCPA, yes, for consumers, GDPR for more than consumers, because obviously privacy is about citizens. It's not just about consumers. It's about a much wider audience. So CCPA will improve privacy, no doubt, for consumers. GDPR has definitely improved privacy for Europeans, for all, for patients, for students, for everybody. And so these are all positives. But there's still regulation. So organizations will still aim for these pieces of legislation as the goal. And what they need to do is to aim for them as the baseline. It's that change in mindset that really needs to be achieved. If you think, for instance, CCPA right now, you have organizations sitting on the fence waiting for CCPA to come in to say, that is the minimum. You must do that. But in essence, if they saw the value of privacy and they saw the value of doing privacy right, they wouldn't need to wait until somebody comes along and said, these are the rights that you need to adhere to. They'd actually use privacy right by identifying that trust relationship as being the most important thing for profit maximization.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, available at Amazon.com and other booksellers. So I know you said that I think it was 75% of consumers said in a Columbia Business School study that they would be willing to share their data if they trusted the brand, in doing so in exchange for loyalty, rewards, or points, or things like that. So how does a company become that kind of company that their brand could be trusted? You can look at it in a number of different ways. FIPS, for instance, in the US, if they adhere to FIPS, that gives you the sense of transparency, choice, recourse, all those different things. In Europe, then FIPS is compulsory. Really, it's embodied in the GDPR. So, how do they do that? Well, they don't have breaches. And if they do have breaches, they sting like a canary, and they talk then about how they're going to fix it. And so they don't let the breach be discovered. They tell, we've had a breach and this is what we've done and this is how we've dealt with it. And they're very keen to close it, and they want to reach out to their customers and say to their customers, something bad happened. And it's a bit like having a bad meal in a restaurant. If it's managed well, you actually go back to that restaurant. You've established a greater sense of trust with that restaurant. So it's exactly the same when somebody has a breach. So a breach can be a bad thing, and it can be a good thing because you can take it as an opportunity to rebuild trust with the consumer. But you can also look to your CSO reports and what are you doing from a CSO perspective? How are you reaching out to the communities that you work within and sit within from a privacy perspective? Are you going into local schools and you're talking to them about privacy? Are you going into local areas and talking about privacy? Are you connecting to privacy advocacy groups? What exactly are you doing from a privacy perspective? Are you signing up to pledges? Are you engaging with conferences? So there's many different things you can do that will establish that trust relationship. They don't have to be direct to the customer for the customer to actually have visibility of them. Where does things like ethics play into privacy today?
So I see a huge amount about ethics, and usually when people are talking about ethics, what they're talking about is really FIPS. They can dress it up in many different ways, but essentially what they're talking about is being fair, being transparent, offering choice, offering recourse. That's usually what you see when you see ethics. For me, I think when you talk about ethics and privacy ethics, what you're really talking about is, can this information be used in a way that possibly you didn't anticipate that it was going to be used? So, for instance, when you look at Facebook, did Facebook know when they set their system up that it was going to be used to invade privacy and bully? Did they know that when they set it up? I doubt that. And that to me is the ethical component that we need to address rather than just the FIPS component, particularly in Europe, because the FIPS element is enshrined and embodied in the GDPR. But beyond FIPS, it is, what can your system or your product or your service be used for that you don't anticipate right now that it could be used for that purpose. And that's a difficult thing to do. And there is a really good framework that you can use called the Omidyar Ethical OS. And it allows you to kind of analyze a system, a product, a service into 8 different areas and discuss with your development teams, is there a possibility that for instance, this product can be used to disseminate untruth? So that's just an area. Not necessarily all of them are directly related to privacy, but they interlink with privacy.
Very interesting. And so what does small organizations do that have, limited budgets, and, how should they be looking at privacy to, be able to compete in this world and to build that kind of trust?
Well, they have a different mechanism to build trust. Typically, small to medium enterprises really know their customers. They know their customers well. So they actually have an opportunity to have one-to-one relationships with customers, where larger organizations don't have that one-to-one relationship capacity. Smaller organizations are not going to exceed regulation. We're hopeful that they do adhere to regulation, but smaller organizations tend not to exceed regulation. But we see smaller organizations who are operating, say, in child protection. We often see those exceed privacy protection because they believe in the value of protecting the child, and their privacy is one of those values. So it depends on the organization. But your typical small organization, if you take an example of many family businesses in Ireland, a typical small organization will just try to adhere to legislation, and the trust relationship gets built by those one-to-one relationships.
Absolutely. And you also talked about, I really like this, that you said that you want to have a policy that brings all your risks together, your compliance risks, your privacy risks, your ethics risks, into a no surprises type policy, that we're not surprised later.
Yeah, this is, we have this terms and conditions element. So in Europe, we call it like the contractual basis. So your legal basis for processing is going to be legitimate interest, or it's going to be contractual. And so there's going to be terms and conditions with that use. And it's all in favor of the organization. And it's, again, trust is built on benevolence. Who's it in favor of more? Is it in favor of the organization more than it is me, the consumer? When that happens, we tend to feel that trust is damaged. So if it's going to be more in favor of you, tell me. And then I feel like at least I have transparency. Tell me that you're going to be the winner, that I'm going to get something, but that you're going to be the winner because you're going to be selling the information and making lots of money on it. Tell me that, and at least let me make an informed decision. So in the past, we've not had that. GDPR has addressed it somewhat, and we see CCPA is trying to address it as well. But that sort of element of informed consent, about transparency, but it's still not, you cannot prescribe that you must write everything on the front screen. It can't all be written on the front screen. So the no surprises piece is that if we feel that there's never going to be any hidden agenda in an organization's transaction with me, then we feel more trust in that organization. And right now at the moment, if you look at any of the privacy concerns studies, most people have concerns about doing business online because they feel there's going to be some surprises in store for them in a year's time when they find out that their information is being used in a way that they didn't expect it to be. And they didn't have the 2 hours to read the terms and conditions because they just wanted to buy something online.
So how do we do the privacy rights with all these global laws? And I know we've, had recent, discussion. I should say more than discussion, but the EU decisions around the Privacy Shield. How do we manage all that and make sure that we do privacy right?
So a privacy shield is just, it's way too big to cover in
absolutely.
So, but the big issue is that there's a very different approach to privacy in the US than in the EU. There always has been. I mean, Safe Harbor, Privacy Shield 1, Privacy Shield X to the power of, until we align the approaches that we take to privacy, then I think that the Privacy Shield issue is going to keep on arising. And the big issues are, of course, national surveillance and recourse, the ability to have recourse and have a regulator to go to. That's what they cited in the Schrems case, but I would have to also note that we have a regulator, but the regulator doesn't often regulate. We have seen only one fine in 2.5 years. So, it can be a bit of window dressing as well to have a regulator. So I that would be my argument about the Schrems case. But how do organizations do it right is very different for every organization. But I'll give you an example is IBM, at the announcement of GDPR, IBM said that they were going to apply GDPR right across the board, regardless of whether GDPR was required or not, because it was the right thing to do. Now, that's their CSO. That's doing privacy right, because it's the right thing to do. In reality, that's probably marketing. They probably figured out, rightly so, that to have a patchwork network of compliance requirements all across the world, use the most rigid, stringent one and apply that all across the world, and then you simply have one piece of legislation to keep adherence to. And so it's a good system to have, and it is doing privacy right, but it's how you dress it, is whether you're dressing it up as CSO. Sure. But it doesn't matter how we get to a good space. It's still a good space if everybody is at that level of privacy. I think the big thing is we need to change how we view privacy. We see privacy as something that comes from a regulator or comes from a commission or comes from a government, when in fact it should come internally from how we operate, how we respect data, how we regard our customers, how we see our customers. Do we see them as profit or do we see them as something that we share value? So it's that element of creating shared value. And that's very much the CSO element, which is if we see our customers as a synergy that we have, that together we can do something better, together we can make profit, together we can share in the positives and the outputs of that, then we change how we see privacy.
I even hesitate to ask after that statement because I think that is just so right on point. What else would you add that our listeners should think of as they go back to their offices in terms of looking at privacy as their next step?
Well, I suppose the one that really I found fascinating, and it's sort of the second study as part of my PhD, is in what's called corporate political activity. So the first one is CSO, and it's very much about what I wrote about in the book. But corporate political activity, in privacy, it relates to lobbying. So you can have organizations that can claim to value privacy, and you can have organizations that claim to do much about privacy and feel about privacy, and they can have a lot of marketing at the front end about privacy. But when you look at the back end, when you look what's going on in the background, they're lobbying for less than CCPA. They're lobbying for less than GDPR. And that's really where you get insight into what organizations really feel. about privacy. And the amount of money that large technology organizations are spending on reducing privacy rights for individuals is enormous right at the moment. And it's those organizations that really value privacy are lobbying for strengthened privacy. And one of the studies that I did was to evaluate if privacy, when it's lobbying, affects consumers' concerns. And it does. Of course it does. If you read that somebody has been lobbying for weakened privacy, you're not going to feel trust for them. And many organizations right now are arguing, particularly with CCPA, that it's going to cost them too much, in the same way that organizations did about GDPR, but it went ahead. And so it's interesting that Apple is, for instance, lobbying for stronger than CCPA, and Facebook has been lobbying for weaker. You know, it tells you what you need to know about what is actually going on between front door and back door.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you very much, Valerie, for your contributions to the CISO Compass book, and thank you very much for sharing this extra knowledge with our listeners.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Cybereason reverses the adversary advantage with future-ready enterprise protection that empowers defenders to end attacks instantly on endpoints, mobile devices, and in the cloud. Cybereason provides the industry's top-rated endpoint detection and response, next-gen antivirus, and proactive threat hunting to deliver full visibility into every malicious operation and one-click remediation. Cybereason ends cyber attacks from endpoints to everywhere. Learn more about cybereason.com/CISO stories.